So many of you will know that one game that's been taking the world by a storm is Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Here's a glimpse of what the title looks like. It is absolutely gorgeous.
The world is full of wonders.
Yet everywhere we go, we walk with death.
Do you mean we're the only ones left?
Yeah, I mean, just look at it. So what is Clair Obscur Expedition 33? Well, it is French development studio Sandfall Interactive's take on a JRPG. And you can see right here the universal acclaim that it has garnered across both critics and players alike, with a 92% review score on Metacritic across 67 critic reviews. And look at the user score here, from over 8,000 user ratings, a 9.7. That may very well be the highest user score on Metacritic, and that's by a long shot. The only other title that comes close is The Witcher 3 Blood and Wine DLC, whose user score is sitting at a 9.3. Even Baldur's Gate 3's user score is sitting at a 9.2. And that's not to imply that user score is a universal sign of which game is superior to what. All I'm saying is, for a user score to be at 9.7 on Metacritic, that is actually insane, and that requires a whole lot of universal love from the players. And where does that universal love come from? Well, aside from the fact that it executes its various facets, near flawlessly. The visuals are incredible. The presentation is top-notch. The music is just on a whole other world. The gameplay is phenomenal and addicting. The story is engaging. Aesthetically, it is really unique with a lot of French motifs, so on and so forth. The list goes on. But the thing that I think really kind of makes Expedition 33 special is how it takes the JRPG genre and pushes it forward. It actually evolves the formula. A lot of people kind of had this mentality of like, well, JRPGs, the turn-based JRPGs, that's more for old school gamers. That genre is kind of dying. But what Clair Obscur Expedition 33 proved is that is not the case at all. You just need to take the JRPG genre and bring a fresh new take to it with some evolutions to the formula. And so they just kind of breathe new life into turn-based JRPG and kind of brought it into the mainstream. It basically took a quote-unquote dying genre, or a genre that was showing its age, and made it new all over again. And that is really something special that requires just a level of passion, but also a level of creativity and forward thinking that is on full display with this title. And the love has been universal indeed, and that is further highlighted by the title sales, managing to achieve 1 million copies sold in just 3 days. Keep in mind that this is Sandfall Interactive's first game. It is a brand new IP, and it's a JRPG, or a turn-based style RPG. And for a game like this to do this well under the circumstances, it is unprecedented. This is a game whose first week on sale exceeded those of JRPGs from major companies like Square Enix and Atlas. For example, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Metaphor Refantatio were both beaten by Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Word of mouth very rapidly spread about this game when it started getting tens everywhere, when a bunch of outlets and content creators started calling it essentially their frontrunner for Game of the Year. And this is right now the highest rated game of 2025. So pretty insane stuff. And looking at Steam charts, you'll find an all-time peak concurrent player number of over 145,000. And that's a number that's grown since its release. So it started with a peak of like 95,000, then, at 117,000, then 129,000. It's only recently that it's garnered 145,000 players. So the player base for this title is actually growing, which is a really good sign, especially for a single-player experience. These are Steam numbers that are far more substantial than the likes of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which peaked at over 40,000 players, and even Metaphor Refantatio, which peaked at over or almost 86,000 players. The performance of Clair Obscur is more in line with the likes of Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered, and this is a very established IP. Looking at daily numbers, you can see that a lot of people are coming back to Expedition 33, with a current 24-hour peak for Expedition 33 being at almost 141,000 players, which is in line with Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered's almost 142,000 players. So we've got a brand new game from a brand new IP from a brand new studio whose level of critical acclaim is very high, whose reception from customers is incredibly positive, whose sales have been incredibly high, whose level of engagement is incredibly high. this is a runaway success. You've even got the president of France who acknowledged the success of Clair Obscur Expedition 33 as a point of pride for all of France, essentially, for bringing French game development into the forefront. Responding to a social media post from the Expedition 33 team, the French president said 1 million copies sold and currently one of the highest rated games in history. And yes, it's French, Macron wrote. Congratulations to Sandfall Interactive and all the creators of Expedition 33. You are a shining example of French audacity and creativity. Now, even more fascinating is the story behind how Expedition 33 got made. For those who don't know, Sandfall Interactive is comprised of many former Ubisoft developers. In fact, there's a development team that was established by ex-Ubisoft devs, namely Guillaume Broche, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who's the CEO and creative director of his development studio, Sandfall Interactive. And once upon a time, Guillaume worked as associate producer and narrative lead at Ubisoft on AAA titles before founding Sandfall Interactive. And right here we have Tom Guillermin, who is another former Ubisoft developer, specifically having done gameplay programming at Ubisoft before joining this indie studio. And you can see right here that this is actually a fairly small team overall, comprised of roughly a little over 30 members. So the fact that such a small team got to make a game like Expedition 33 is something that they should be extremely proud of, because Expedition 33 feels like a game that was made by hundreds upon hundreds of developers. It is at a level of quality that feels like this was one of those like super high budget AAA games, but this turned out to be a game that was reasonably scaled and reasonably budgeted with an agile, kind of smallish team that were able to push out what many consider to be a masterpiece. Now, recently, news outlet BBC did an interview with the lead of Expedition 33 and its development studio, Sandfall Interactive, Guillaume Broche, and he was asked essentially how Expedition 33 came about, what's the history behind how he came to establish this studio, and one of the first things he said is apparently that it all began with him being bored in their job and wanting to do something different, referring to his job at Ubisoft and being bored of the fact that the projects that higher-ups approve and greenlight and assign were just not that fun to create. He wanted to make what he wanted to make. He wanted to essentially pursue a passion project, and that's kind of not what you generally see at the highest levels of AAA companies who do not pursue passion projects. They pursue trend-chasing titles, trend-chasing genres. They pursue things that market research deem to be very monetizable rather than aiming to give developers the room and the tools to cook something that is truly unique based on just passionate ideas that they have. And so, yeah, he was bored, and so he left Ubisoft, and the end result is that he kind of put Ubisoft to shame by making this masterpiece that is receiving a level of acclaim, a level of engagement, a level of financial success that Ubisoft could really use. Assassin's Creed Shadows did sell well, as many expected, but generally Ubisoft has had failure after failure, and that's why they're kind of in the precarious position that they are, with their stock price being the lowest it's ever been. They've still had to deal with a lot of canceled projects or delayed projects and layoffs and studio shutdowns, because a lot of their releases just aren't as exciting anymore. And not to mention that the budget for a lot of those AAA games made by companies like Ubisoft are so overblown that they require a ridiculous amount of sales for them to be considered a success. Whereas something like Expedition 33, made by a smaller team, its budget was nothing ridiculous, it was nothing untenable, the scale of what they made was within reason. And so when you look at what Sandfall Interactive made with Expedition 33, when you look at how they've essentially proved that you don't need a massive budget and a massive team to create something that exudes AAA and is able to push the boundaries of a genre like a JRPG to the point where it becomes a mainstream success, when you see this smaller team able to push a game of this quality, just pure quality, in a way that a lot of those big AAA publishers with their massive budgets and their massive teams aren't able to deliver, what this does is essentially put those companies to shame and really prove that you don't need to be unreasonable with your budget and your scale and your ambitions and your team size to deliver a product that can be both critically, incredibly, universally successful and commercially also just viable and successful. And that's what we're seeing more and more, is that a lot of the greatest games are coming from development teams that kind of have that creative autonomy, that are coming from that place of we want to make our passion project. That's how the likes of Larian and CD Projekt, the likes of Warhorse with Kingdom Come Deliverance, the likes of Hazelight with, It Takes Two and Split Fiction, and now Sandfall Interactive. It's great to see these kinds of studios who are purely driven by the passion of the vision and idea that they have to push the gaming medium and the genres that they're tackling forward, come to the forefront and the limelight of the most successful, both commercial and critical games in recent memory. And it's great to see these kinds of studios rise, while the trend-chasing AAA publishers and development studios who pursue kind of more generic releases and projects kind of fall by the wayside. It just gives hope that this is the path forward for AAA gaming and just gaming as a whole. It gives credence to passion projects kind of being what really make a mark in gaming history. Yeah, this whole article is really interesting to read. It talks about how Guillaume, the creative director of Expedition 33, was inspired by his love for classic Japanese RPGs and series like Final Fantasy. It talks about how he found key members of the development team like Jennifer Svedberg Yen, who eventually became the lead writer for the game, on websites like Reddit. Guillaume had put out auditions for this game to essentially hire voice actors, and she happened to kind of send an audition, but it happened to work out that she's actually better as Expedition 33's lead writer, so that's what she did. The composer was apparently found via a post on music sharing website SoundCloud that Guillaume found, the composer being an individual by the name of Laurent Testard, and the music of this game is considered to be among the highlight features of the title. The fact that he found some of the most key members of Expedition 33 through essentially social media platforms and, going through forums, it gives the vibe of like a passionate modding team, except they set out to make their own game, is kind of the vibe here. It's less about like the formal process of hiring someone and more about like, look, if you can bring something creative to the table and you have that passion and you share in my vision, then let's just make this thing that we're all passionate about. It's just such an unusual way that this team came together. And after certain key members came in, and after they got funding from publisher Kepler, that's when they were able to expand the team to around, a little over 30 people. That's how they were able to draw in major voice actors like freaking Andy Serkis and Charlie Cox from Daredevil, alongside video game voice actors like Jennifer English and Ben Starr. And because of the smaller size of the team, a lot of people had to take on a lot of different roles to be able to execute on this project. But ultimately, with a combination of luck and a shared passion and a very clear vision of what this game is, they managed to ship one of the most heralded games of not just this year, but of, this last decade, it feels like. It's weirdly all a bit patchwork how this game came together, but the kind of commonality within it that kind of gave this the momentum to ship it with the level of critical acclaim is that the only agenda behind this was to kind of realize somebody's passion for something that inspired them. In the case of Guillaume, being Final Fantasy and wanting to take that JRPG turn-based genre to a whole new level. And that's what Expedition 33 does. The same way that Baldur's Gate 3 took the quote-unquote dying CRPG genre, something that a lot of people perceived as something being for old guard gamers or hardcore gamers. Baldur's Gate 3 took that genre, evolved it, and improved it, and modernized it, and made it appealing to modern audiences, and proved that no one genre is ever really dead. It's just about bringing fresh and evolving new ideas to it. And the wild part about the Expedition 33 team is that it's mostly comprised of junior people who, aren't as experienced with game development. And it goes to highlight that Ubisoft has talented people. In fact, most AAA publishers have tons of talented people under their umbrella, but it's just their wings are clipped here and there because of just those corporate mandates that compromise a game's vision, a game's potential, a game's design, and just make them worse for the sake of making them more monetizable. And so Expedition 33 is an exemplary example of what happens when you let talented folks, even those who are junior, just cook under a strong leadership, under a very passionate leadership, a leadership that is fueled by the passion of game making and not the passion of money making, a true OG gamer who just wants to make games that inspired their, essentially their gaming history. I mean, you can see how many people are celebrating Expedition 33 and this comment that essentially the director of this game got bored at Ubisoft and then ended up making this genre defining, this kind of game of the year contender masterpiece, because a lot of people are also feeling burned out and bored by what a lot of AAA publishers are outputting and how they are trend chasing and kind of becoming very generic in their ideas. So right here, Gerardo's post discussing how Expedition 33's director was bored by Ubisoft, and that's what inspired him to start his own indie studio and make his own game. You've got tweets like these, posts like these with, almost 90,000 likes, over 2.7 million views, and people just in utter disbelief at just how small the team actually was that made this game. Just in full support of this style of game making and highlighting how it's crazy that a small team comprised of mostly junior devs have somehow managed to make a game that is that much better and that much more inspired than a lot of what Ubisoft puts out. Despite the fact that Ubisoft has more money, more manpower, more resources, goes to show that what makes a successful game isn't about how much money you have, how much manpower you have, and how many resources you have. It's about how those elements are utilized, and it's about giving developers a proper environment to make their ideas shine. Here's another post from Genki highlighting how Guillaume was bored by Ubisoft, and that's why he made Expedition 33, and people just really praising the fact that he kind of called out the genericness and how boring a lot of Ubisoft games tend to be because they don't really take a whole lot of risks. And so a lot of people are engaging with posts like these and are celebrating Expedition 33 for being that hope for video games, where it feels like there will be developers who will actually take the route of focusing on vision and creativity and pushing boundaries rather than tackling the same old and trying to get a piece of some pie and trying to get into an oversaturated market for the sake of monetization and for the sake of meeting financial quotas for investors. So right here, somebody said, new young talent will supplant the old gaming legends. A lot of old studios lost their way, chasing the whims of investors and board of directors. Games became more about safe goals and deadlines instead of high-risk, passion projects. I could not agree more. And that's kind of a great summary of how a lot of people feel, how Guillaume felt, and how that sentiment led to the development of Expedition 33, a passion project that proves that passion projects very much have a place in gaming, very much are financially viable, very much can achieve incredible feats while also being good for business. And that it can be done within a reasonable budget, within a reasonable scale, with a reasonably sized team. Now, worth clarifying is that while the core team of Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is comprised of roughly over 30 people, they did outsource some stuff. So, for example, where gameplay animation is concerned, there was an 8-person Korean gameplay animation team that contributed to the game. When it comes to musicians, you've got 30-plus musicians who helped shape the music of the game, and those people all were very much involved in the development of the game as far as I'm concerned. You've got dozens upon dozens of people that worked on localization, QA, and voice production work. So the totality of how many people actually worked on this game is significantly more than 30, but it's still overall a smaller development team compared to what you see from a lot of those, like billion-dollar AAA publishers, and just how inefficient they are at making their games as the budgets and scales and just the lack of direction kind of get bloated, and it leads to just a lot of clogging of the pipeline. So yeah, Expedition 33 is not only just an incredible game, it is also a phenomenal model for how game development can be. If more games were developed with this kind of mentality, with this kind of process, with this kind of reasonable scale and size, I think the gaming industry would just be so much better off, and the quality bar of game releases would be so much higher. That's not to say that making games like this isn't a risk. There very much is a timeline potentially where this game may not have picked up the level of attention that it did. But ultimately, because the game is just that good, it garnered the level of attention that it did. It garnered the level of coverage that it did. It garnered the level of word of mouth that it did. And so it's a well-deserved success that ultimately started with someone who was bored with a lot of the AAA norms that tend to be pitfalls for those kinds of games, and decided to take matters into their own hands, basically said, fine, I'll do it myself. And the end result is nothing short of one of the most remarkable achievements in gaming history. Well, at the very least, that's one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on Expedition 33 as a game, if you've played it, and what do you think about the history surrounding it, and what you think about what the lead director and designer said about how he was bored of just working at Ubisoft, essentially, and wanting to kind of pursue things that he himself was more creatively passionate about. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, Stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.